My name is Natasha Briškim. I am a podcaster from Slovenia, and thank you everyone for joining us. This will be another one in a series of conversations about a topic that is very dear to us, Aljaž, human rights, one of the world's most important values and certainly a cornerstone of European integration. Aljaž, so happy to be again together doing another conversation on human rights. And since you always do a lovely introduction, let me say a few words about you. Excellent columnist and commentator, blogger since Aljaž 2006.
Correct, thank you.
Okay, and if interested in a political situation in Slovenia, but not only, sleeping with Pengovsky is definitely a destination where you can find some very, very thoughtful and witty blogs as well. Aljaž, we have an interesting guest today as well.
And yes, we do. Thank you, Natasha, for that excellent and lovely introduction. For all those of you who do not know, Natasha is an accomplished journalist, foreign correspondent, and explorer. She's been to the North Pole, mind you. But today we won't be talking about our exploits, Natasha, but rather talking about the state of human rights in Europe and around the world. And with us is our excellent, eminent guest, Luxembourg MP, Frau Anna Brasseur. Welcome, and moyen.
Moyen. Moyen.
Okay, that's how
we say hello, yes.
Okay, so you have been a former minister in the Luxembourg government and a former president of the Parliamentary Assembly of Council of Europe, and also a president of ALDE. So we would like to hear your thoughts as a long-standing politician on the state of human rights, on the protection and breaches by the governments or other actors in the EU, and of course broader. So Googling you, I found a speech you did in 2014. It was the challenges to human rights and democracy in Europe. And I was wondering, a migrant crisis later, a pandemic for the past 2 years, how would your speech look today?
Well, unfortunately, it would stress more worries than it did in 2014, even if in 2014, the situation was not easy. But since then, unfortunately, a lot of things happened, and not in the good direction. But if I look to human rights, I think we always should look where we should look back and think of our forefathers who had the idea to create the Council of Europe in the aftermath of World War II, because after World War I, they managed to stop the war, but that was not the construction for a last long peace. So, and that was in fact the beginning of the difficulties which led then to the Second World War. And after the Second World War, they really thought, now we have to sit together and create something on the level of the United Nations and on the level of the Council of Europe. And since then, we have, fortunately, the Convention on Human Rights. But unfortunately, as we see, it's less and less really looked upon. And I think we made a mistake in all our countries. We took human rights and the freedom which comes with it just for granted. And now we see that it isn't true. So we really need, and in every country, and the lesson they had also after World War II was that it's only together that we can find solutions. Or now we see that more and more countries, governments tend to have an inward look, and they are just putting up barriers, all kind of barriers, not only physical ones, but also those in our minds, which are even more dangerous, I think, those barriers to overcome. And all the like-minded people have to stick together in order to put human rights again on the map.
Brasseur, would it be, apologies, would it be fair to say that just as Europe and the world did the right thing eventually after two horrible World War episodes, and so too will Europe and the world in a hopefully smaller scale do the right thing eventually with regard to defense of human rights and liberal democracy and rule of law in general? Are you optimistic?
Yes, the instruments are all there. Also with the control, if I just see look at the European Court for Human Rights based in Strasbourg, but if they take decisions, some countries just don't implement those decisions and don't change their laws. I had one question once to Mr. Lavrov, the Minister of Foreign Affairs of Russia, who came to the Council of Europe, and then he said, well, we implement the legal decisions, but the other decisions are political ones. And of course, then it gets more and more difficult to find arguments because, of course, those decisions taken by the European Court for Human Rights, they are legal decisions, not political ones, based on text and based on facts. And now it's becoming more and more difficult. If I look what happens, for instance, in Poland for the moment, with the threat to the independence of justice, one of the pillars of our democratic system, justice has to be independent. So I'm really, for the moment, I'm not, unfortunately, I'm not very optimistic.
Since you mentioned Poland, the protection and reinforcements of the human rights of the refugees and asylum seekers in Europe, I would like to hear your thoughts on the situation currently at the Polish-Belarus border.
Well, what happens in Belarus is just unacceptable. And just for information, of course, you know it, that the Council of Europe, there are 47 member states, and the geographical Europe has 50 countries. So 3 states are not members. That's Kosovo, because of the status of Kosovo not being recognized by every country. It's the Vatican. Well, the Vatican is really not a democracy. And it's Belarus, because Belarus is really not a democracy. And they still have the death penalty, which is really a red line for the Council of Europe. And now what the regime of Lukashenko is doing, I'm not talking about Belarus, because the citizens of Belarus, they are victims of that dictatorship. And now, as he is now taking people in despair in order to take them as a shield against Europe, that's just unacceptable. On the other hand, at the border, what Poland is doing is also unacceptable. And if I look at those pictures, it's really, it's horrible what we see there. And there we would need a European solution, an EU solution, even if it's not for the 47 member states of the Council of Europe. We should, Europe, the European Union, should speak with one voice, but we can't claim the European Union. Who is that? That's the 47, that's the 27 member states, and they have to take responsibility. And I hope that people are in those countries are going to stand up in order to find a dignified solution for the migration crisis, because this didn't start now with the conflict on the border. This started in 2015 with Syria, where Europe really failed to get active, and we just left it to Turkey. We still leave Turkey alone with that problem, and also other countries on the borders like Greece with and around the Mediterranean, Italy, Spain, all those countries, and that is not acceptable, and it's not solidarity. And it's really, you can see those right-wing movements coming up more and more in all European countries, and that's a big danger to our freedom and to our democracy.
Speaking of solidarity, as you rightly noted, that was the one big thing that was lacking in the Great Migration Crisis of 2015. Ironically, Poland was among the countries which refused to get involved in actively solving the crisis, and is now at the forefront of another wholly manufactured migration crisis, manufactured by the regime in Minsk, obviously. Is this at all, do you see this as an opportunity? And I hate to sound like a motivational speaker here, but can this problem be turned into an opportunity for asserting a common European policy, for reframing the European asylum seekers policy and the refugee policy?
Well, it's a problem being a Europe of 27. I speak again of the European Union of 27, because in all those countries, you have all the time, you have some election going on. Fortunately, now the elections in Germany are over and they are going to have a new government, which is fine. And I hope they are going to really drive Mrs. Merkel. She did a lot of good things, but unfortunately, she was not supported by her own party. And each time you have elections, more and more right-wing and populistic movements are coming up. And those in power, of course, they are afraid to do more. They are under pressure. So as you have all the time, and with the political instability, it gets more and more difficult to find common solutions. And I hope now that with the German elections, we can make some steps forward. But now in France, next year, you have the presidential elections with people like Zemmour from the really far right, and with Marine Le Pen, which is from the far right, and putting the democratic parties also under pressure. And there you can see a shift. They are getting, even democratic parties have a more right-winged narrative. And that is really more than worrying.
You mentioned that only together we can find solutions that we face today in today's international environment, that also the solidarity is something that is sort of lacking. And I would think that there is another huge problem that we have to deal with, and that would be populism. Now, it gains power, I would say, with every crisis. And I would like to hear also your thoughts on how to deal with that, because it's certainly a challenge to liberal democracies.
Yes, we see more and more illiberal democracies coming up. But if you speak about illiberal, I think that doesn't match with democracy anymore. And in the Council of Europe, we had a campaign, and I was the ambassador of that campaign, the No Hate Speech campaign. Mm-hmm. And I think that is so important to get everybody involved, because populism is also getting more and more powerful because of social media. Social media, there you can post whatever you want to post. And that is, of course, like an echo chamber, bringing all those people together and making things worse. And I think that hate speech must, in every legislation, national legislation, being more severely controlled. First of all, of course, there is freedom of speech, but there are really limits, and we must have tools, legal tools, in order to combat that hate speech, because the hate speech is at the beginning of all those populist movements.
In your opinion, can this even be solved at a national level? Because the way I see it, the illiberal or autocratic populism, if you will, the hate speech, the false news propaganda, is just sort of creeping from state to state and pops up even in places where you wouldn't expect it. For example, just this past weekend, there was in Luxembourg there was a anti-vax rally which got out of hand, mostly fueled by conspiracy theories, and at some point things got actually physical, which is not something you often see in Luxembourg. So is there a European approach? Can there be a European approach to all of this? Otherwise, we would just be chasing this beast all over the continent.
Well, I hope that the leaders in Europe are coming together and off the records speak together how to solve this. Unfortunately, it's getting more and more difficult to speak out to speak off the records, because everything is tweeted immediately, and then there is a counter reaction, how to react on that. I think that political leaders, and many of them, agree that there is a red line, and we have together, we have to fix that and to set up tools. When I said in national legislation, of course, it's the national legislation which has to answer, but the framework, of course, has to be taken on the European level, and hopefully also on the level of the Council of Europe, because it's not just limited to the 27 EU countries, but to the 47 of the Council of Europe.
You are also involved into projects with younger audiences, younger population. I wonder, what do they tell you about what kind of a vision of Europe do they aspire to? Do they identify the same human rights issues as maybe the older generation does? And how to get them, seriously involved in being part of finding solutions to the challenges of today?
One of the problems is if you address yourself to an audience of young people, you find those motivated young people, and they are already convinced. Of course, you have to help them and to underline them and to give them the tools to get stronger. But it's so difficult to get to the majority of the young people, those who are not convinced, or those even who are more and more influenced by social media with all sorts of funny news, or even fake news, or dangerous news. And that is the problem. So you can say it's a matter of education. Of course, schools must do a lot, but as a former Minister of Education, I always said formal education in schools cannot do everything. And I know a lot of youth movements like the Scout movement. I was really very active in Scouting. They are doing a lot. But those joining that movement, they are already convinced. So it's a matter of how to get in contact with those who just follow Europe, or those politicians, and they earn a lot of money, which is not true. Or with, I don't believe anybody anymore. And I don't know how to get in touch with that majority of young people.
You touched on an important issue there, and it pops up in basically every interview in this series with Natasha: trust. It seems that the trust between the people, the media, and the politicians, or the state, if you will, has just disintegrated, and now nobody trusts anybody anymore. And obviously, I recognize that it's difficult to start, but let's say that as journalists, we try to start on our end. Where do you think the politicians, the political class, should start rebuilding the trust with the rest of with everyone else?
Well, you know, politicians are human beings, and there are some, they are extraordinary, but there are some who are less extraordinary, to put it mildly. But it's not a class per se. I admire all those who are taking up, especially in these difficult times, responsibility. And you have to think of that. I'm glad that 3 years ago, I stepped down from all my mandates because I thought enough is enough and you have to leave one day. But if I look what happens now, I admire those who really continue to take up responsibility. And I think we should also get this message through, because it's not given to everybody to really stand up and take responsibility, be it on local or on national level, in politics or in different movements, in human rights movements or any movement. So I think every human being deserves respect. And we have to get back to that notion that even if we don't agree on every subject, of course, unfortunately, we don't. What we need is respect one for the other. And I don't have a solution to get back to that, but that is, for me, one of the first points we have to address.
As a politician, you have been known while you were active and also now as a champion for women's rights. When you started your career, I would assume there absolutely weren't that many female politicians around as they are today. With that much experience that you have on a very high levels, what do you say to young women, to how to start their maybe political careers? With what message are you trying to inspire them to take part?
When I started, that was in 1975. You weren't born.
I was.
So we were just two. There was the mayor of the City of Luxembourg, Colette Flesch, who a lady who asked me to run for the elections. I came just from university, and I said no. I had no experience, and she said, "Do you think young people should get involved?" I said yes. Do you think women should get involved? I said yes, of course. Well, you have those two qualities. I said, well, that's not enough. But I was curious on, you know, to see how a campaign was running, how the party was functioning. So finally, I was a candidate. And the day of the elections, I thought, well, it's a pity. Today it's going to be over. But I got elected, to my surprise, to the surprise of everybody. And we were just two ladies in the Council of Europe. In the council, in the city council, in the City of Luxembourg. And now it evolved. And I think, of course, women have to get more and more involved. And what they have to do to be convinced of what they are doing, and not as François Giroud, she said, equality will be reached the day where mediocre women can also attend to higher responsibility. So, and, you know, everybody has advantages and disadvantages, but I think that men more believe in their capabilities than women do. So you have to dare, and I recommend every woman to get involved, every young people to get involved, be it also on other subjects, but not just follow those who are shouting, but really doing something. It's worthwhile, even if it's getting more and more difficult.
And on that positive yet challenging note, I'm afraid, Natasha, we've run out of time. Madame Anne Brasseur, vielmals merci.
Das geschieht.
And all the best in the future.
Yes, all the best. And I wish you a Merry Christmas and a Happy New Year.
Thank you very much. Same to you. All the best.
Thank you.